Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Delve into Deepholme mini set card review. The mini set is coming out any moment now by the time most of you will be watching this. Perhaps it's already out, who knows? I just want to give my thoughts overall on the mini set and the cards contained therein. Firstly, one of the things I really like about the mini set is that it expands on Excavate. Not only does it expand on the Excavate mechanic by putting it into additional classes in the form of Excavate cards and legendary rewards for both Paladin and Shaman, but it also introduces additional Excavate rewards to continue to increase the variety of game experiences for decks that are playing with Excavate cards. And we have 3 new potential rewards, which is, nope, not that one. Just kidding. These. I'm getting ahead of myself, clearly. Boom, boom, and boom. We have the Heart Blossom, Deepholme Geode, and World Pillar Fragment are now available as the common, rare, and epic rewards. These are additional things, just like when like the Draconic Lackey was added back during the Uldum block. Now, when you excavate, you can get these in addition to things like Rock, Water Source, and Trog at 1, or Stalactite, and etc., at 2, and the Fragment at 3. I think that the World Pillar Fragment is likely one of the more powerful excavate rewards out there. The Discover an Elemental to summon, add the others to your hand is a very powerful effect that is also really, really high value. So you could potentially hit, say, a Ragnaros to put into play for 3 mana, right? I do believe that Neptulon as a Colossal is excluded from this. I'm not 100% sure. I know that anything that randomly summons Colossals cannot hit Neptulon, but I believe these do exclude Neptulon because it is a potential summon effect. But say, you're playing a class that has their own elementals, you could potentially summon your own elementals. Like, for instance, if you're playing Shaman, you could hit a Walking Mountain, which is a 9-cost elemental that obviously is insanely powerful to get into play for 3 mana. I do have a little bit of a concern just with the power level of World Pillar Fragment in Rogue, with just how incredibly quickly Rogue is able to excavate currently, and being able to hit, these super, super powerful things that early in the game in a deck that also has, a lot of staying power thanks to the value generation from Azurite Scorpion, is a little scary. But overall, I think that the Excavate expansion of the Excavate rewards, as well as the Excavate classes, which we'll obviously get into momentarily, is a cool addition to this that alters the gameplay of even existing decks without even adding any new cards. And I think it's really cool when that is able to happen through a mechanic like this. But now let's talk about the actual cards in the set. We're going to be going in alphabetical order because that is how I have the card images saved, and it's going to make my life a lot easier. So these are broken down into, obviously, into classes, but also multi-class cards like this one. Aftershocks. I do want to point out, I really like multi-class cards in Hearthstone, and especially like multi-class cards in a mini set. One of the challenges with Hearthstone, especially with the expansion of the number of classes, is to be able to have enough content within a smaller pool of cards like this one that can really impact the metagame in a meaningful way. And one of the best ways that you can do that is by actually giving classes more unique cards to use than they otherwise would get, thanks to multi-class. Having multi-class cards allows you to actually get more possible utilization of any of these given cards across strategies because more classes can use them. And obviously you don't just want things to be neutral, because that really can lead to homogenization if you have crazy, crazy powerful neutral cards that end up in every deck. But this one, Aftershocks. This is a Shaman and a Warrior card. Deal 1 damage to all minions 3 times. Cost 2 less if you cast a spell last turn. So in an optimal situation, this is basically a 3 damage AoE, but not just that. It is a 3 damage AoE that will clear death rattles in between. So if your opponent has a board of, say, 1/1s with Soul of the Forest, they're all dead. If your opponent has a lingering zombie, that's dead. If your opponent has, anything that falls into that, sort of range of stuff, like, old school haunted creeper, dead. And that's, a very powerful effect, and especially a very powerful effect when you can get it for one, rather for 2 mana. One of the things that Warrior in particular really struggles with in the current metagame is early game Divine Shield minions, right? Having your opponent who playing Paladin, who fills the board with a bunch of cheap Divine Shield minions, really, really difficult. To clear that with the damage-based removal that Warrior typically has. And that can often let them get set up to the point where they're able to play a Crusader Aura or whatever that helps them snowball off of that position that they've created, and you fall really, really far behind and just end up getting run over. But with Aftershocks, you can clear all of that. Very easy to have things like shield block or rifts that you're able to generate value from. And enable your Aftershocks to cost less. So I think this card is really, really powerful. Works really well with even stuff like just Acolyte of Pain that Warrior decks historically have at least somewhat been into running. So yeah, I think this is a very powerful card that will see quite a bit of play, especially in Warrior. I am less clear on it in Shaman, but controlling Shaman decks along the lines of like Reno Shaman are certainly potentially powerful, and this is just a strong card in any deck that isn't looking to have its own board presence and wants to control things instead. All right, next up, we have Burning Heart. Very different sort of warrior card. This is a warrior/demon hunter card. Deal 2 damage to a minion, very warrior. If it survives, give your hero +3 attack this turn, very demon hunter. So this is an interesting card for potentially like a pain style deck. You could use it on your own things. It could also just be a cheap removal effect, killing small minions. This one doesn't jump out to me as being as exciting a card as some of the others. It's harder to use. Obviously, it being 1 cost makes that part as easy. But if you're playing this on an opposing minion, you generally are going to want to kill it. And 2 damage for 1 is fine. But if you do kill it, you don't get the +3 attack, and you're just, it's not super exciting. If you have some special way to take advantage of that attack, if you're magnifying the attack in some sense, then you're getting more value out of this. But overall, this is very good for killing mid-sized minions if you're gonna smash them with your face. But there's also lots of other ways that you could already be doing that. In frankly both of these, not nearly as efficient as this, I guess. If you're specifically going to kill a 5 health minion and you don't have armor to be able to shield slam it or something, this is a very powerful way to do that. But yeah. This I feel like is maybe this ends up in a fire warrior aggro style deck that wants to damage its own things because it wants to be a bit more aggressive than the sort of typical enraged warrior we have seen historically. Gives you a little bit more burst with a Grom or something like that, cheaper than some of the other options for enraging your minions, but I think a little bit of a harder card to use. Next up, we have Chaos Creation. 6-cost spell, deal 6 damage, summon a random 6-cost minion, destroy the bottom 6 cards of your deck. This is a weird one, right? This is a really weird one. It's, we already have Firelands Portal, right? Fireland Portal costs 7. It does 5 and summons a 6-drop nowadays, right? It got buffed to summon a higher cost minion. Does it even do 6 as well? I don't even remember it. I know it got buffed to summon a 6-drop. I forget if it does 6 damage as well. Either way, this is a little bit cheaper than that, but it also comes with destroy the bottom 6 cards of your deck, which mana discounts are very real, but so is losing a significant percentage of your deck for especially the builds that a lot of mages want to play these days, right? And I am getting confirmation from chat here, as we are doing this live on Twitch, that it does indeed do 6 damage. So this is basically a 1 reduced cost from Firelands Portal, and the Fell spell, which is relevant for decks that are looking to ramp up the number of spell types that they are playing, but you destroy the bottom 6 cards of your deck. And again, if you were playing like if this is going in, say, like a hyper aggressive deck, the additional efficiency is a really big deal, right? But a lot of mage builds are built around, hey, I'm gonna play stuff until I sift you to death, and the potential that you just remove your sift from the game because it was in the bottom 6 cards of your deck is very real. And I do think I do want to say that I think that lots of people will probably overvalue the downside of this, of the destroy the bottom 6 cards of your deck, because they look at it like, oh, you lose 6 cards from this. It's like, well, in most games, for say an aggressive deck, the bottom of your deck are cards you're never going to see unless you have dredge effects or something. The bottom cards of your deck, they don't matter, right? Because the game isn't necessarily going to go that long. Maybe it does against like a slow controlling deck, but like a lot of those you're going to lose anyway. Because if you're playing a more, faster, more aggressive deck. So, like that, it being a more efficient Firelands Portal is very relevant. But Firelands Portal isn't even a card that sees like a lot of play right now, even without this downside, right? So yeah, I think this is a card that's like in a weird space given the current context of Mage in the metagame. Maybe it goes into Warlock decks that are looking to maybe you're playing a Warlock deck that's looking to go to Fatigue to power up your, crescendos and stuff. And you're playing like a more aggressive version of like Fatigue Warlock that's looking to like increasing insanity, somehow, make your fatigue absolutely enormous and make yourself immune and crescendo people. That I could see, but otherwise I think this is a pretty hard sell. All right, moving on. Crimson Expanse. This is a location, and this is, I believe, a Warrior Death Knight card Warrior Demon Hunter card as well. So this is interesting because this is very much the copy guy. I forget the name of it now. That was 2 cost got nerfed to 3 cost. This is all right. We are we're looking to copy damage things. This one is you get a copy that's dormant. You get 2 uses of it. So it costs a little bit more. You can keep it on board, so you don't have to play it in the same turn as your other thing. But like you can't copy this with, say, like Grom and nuke your opponent to death. I guess I do want to jump back 1 second again here, because somehow I blanked on Chaos Creation. Yeah, get rid of sludges. There you go. That's what you really want to do with it. Not the ridiculous self fatigue thing. You blow people up with sludges with this. So that's probably where that lives. Anyway, moving back to Crimson Expanse. But yeah, this feels a little bit weird because like, how good is a dormant thing? Like the fact that it is a location, so you don't have to line up the mana with the thing you want to copy in the same turn. Getting like, having this in play, getting like a dormant, say, Grom or Anima Extractor or whatever, it feels difficult to make this work, right? The fact that you can spend all of your mana in a turn and still get the copy with this is a really big deal, right? Like, but you're spending 4 mana ahead of time and spending a board spot on it. It feels like that's a pretty high cost. Because using this on the thing is you have 2 board slots for a turn that aren't doing anything. You spent 4 mana that doesn't do anything until you've used this. It can work in opponent's things, of course. But like a lot of those things that you'd want to copy from an opponent are things you want to use right away, like a Titan, for instance. So this like feels difficult to use to me. It does let you like get copies of really, really potentially powerful things because again, you don't need to spend the mana alongside the thing that you are copying like you would a lot of the other copy effects. But I do feel like it's just very, very high opportunity cost that makes it more difficult to find a really effective way to use it. All right, next up, we have Crystal Cluster. 6 cost spell. Gain 3 empty mana crystals. Any that can't fit, summon a 3/7 elemental with taunt. So this is a very interesting card. Obviously, any like multi-ramp can be really, really powerful. 6 is a strange place to ramp, right? Because this brings you immediately to 10. You know, like you go from 6 mana to 10 mana, and if you draw it later in the game, you know, maybe you already have 10 mana. 3/3/7 taunts is kind of sick, right? Like I feel like having an additional form of ramp in, say, a Reno Druid deck, is potentially quite strong. If you're just a really dedicated ramp deck, you know, maybe you play this along with, you know, Seedsman, maybe play Wild Growth, you know, into this. Nourish obviously remains kind of the all-star, especially because it has the draw cards secondary mode and the ability to get doubled by Embrace of Nature. But I do think that this, you know, as either redundancy or just an additional option for Reno decks, I think is a very, very strong option that gets you to your biggest stuff very quickly. And the sort of fail case of, you know, hey, you have all your mana already and you draw this. 3/3/7 taunts is not a bad deal at all. Crucially, it's not a nature spell, which does mean that, you know, it is weaker in the context of things like Topior or with Witherbloom Seedsman not be able to find it. But I do think that this is likely to be a card that becomes a pretty powerful staple in heavily ramp-oriented Druid decks. Next up, we have one of the legendaries here, Deep Miner Bran. 6 cost 2/4, so double the cost of OG Bran, but this is Highlander Bran. With Battlecry, if your deck has no duplicates, your Battlecries trigger twice for the rest of the game. So this, I think, is one of the most exciting cards in the set, pretty clearly. Everyone knows the Bran effect is a pretty nutty one, and getting a permanent Bran effect is pretty nutty. It being obviously a Highlander type effect restricts, you know, where it can go. It being a warrior card obviously restricts where it can go. It can only go in warrior decks. And it's interesting because I think there is at least currently in the way that warrior decks are built, there's a lot of incentive for redundancy because, you know, like a lot of the current like warrior cards want you to play Excavate, right? And if you're playing Excavate with something, you know, you want like the brawler who you win the brawl automatically if you excavated twice. You want to play like as many of the Excavate cards as you can, which makes the sort of no duplicate effects harder to pull off, especially in a timely manner. And this is something that, like, it is only facilitating future stuff. It's not like Race Straza. It's not like Reno, where, you know, you play this and it's kind of a done deal. You've gotten, like, what you want out of it. This, you know, you're like, okay, I now need to play battle cries that work with this. And, like, you can't play duplicates of many of the best battle cries you might want, like a lot of the Excavate stuff, for instance, in order to effectively use this. Like, maybe you could, but it's awkward. And, like, Boom Boss Thorgrun is another card that's like, oh, you know, you can double up on the number of bombs that you get in your deck. You can double up on, like, the Sharp-Eyed Seeker to draw those, or to draw, like, Fizzle, Photograph or whatever. And all of that, I think, is pretty powerful, but the Boom Boss turns off this if you play it first. It turns off Reno if you play this into Boom Boss first. It turns it off for a very long time. So there's like a lot of weird kind of cross sections of like, hey, these are the things that are best with it, that then turn it off or just play poorly with it. So I think this is a very interesting deck building challenge to make this work in the best possible way. Because you would want to play a deck that's like, hey, it uses this with Excavate cards, because the Excavate cards are battle cries. You know, like you have the the Miner and the Burrow Buster, which you'd love to play alongside this, but you don't want to play, you know, maybe you play two of them and you just wait with this. But again, because this is just an enabler, it's like, okay, well, like, it is harder to use this in a deck with a bunch of duplicates because you have to play it and then spend a bunch of mana on the battle cries to have made it worth it. Unlike, say, Reno, which just gets the job done right away. So, crucially, this doesn't like double like Odin anymore either. There was a period where playing Odin multiple times, got bounced or whatever, would double the effect you got from Odin. It no longer works that way, which is probably good, because Deep Miner Bran into Odin would mean that, you know, you just kill someone instantly by casting a heavy plate. But yeah, you know, I am very much curious to explore what true Highlander warrior style decks might look like. I have previously played, like Reno in like an ETC or whatever in order to have the access to that to kill the Wraithstraza portal in a warrior deck that really wanted it. But obviously with the excavate stuff, I didn't really want to play Highlander, so finding the correct balance there I think will be a very interesting challenge. Next up we have Digging Straight Down. This is a Shaman card, one of the first Shaman excavate cards. 4-cost spell, deal 8 damage to a minion, excavate a treasure. Nature spell. So pretty straightforward. It's just removal spell that excavates. 8 damage to a minion is a lot of damage. Someone in the chat said it is a Minecraft reference. That is, I've never played Minecraft, but excavating is basically Minecraft. You find your treasures or whatever, I guess. But yeah, this is just like a fine card. Nothing super, like fancy about it. 4 to just kill a minion is a little expensive, especially when it can't kill everything. So it's not super efficient, but again, all the excavate cards are a little bit inefficient because they are giving you the value from excavate, so it just feels like it's going to be a basic inclusion. If you are playing, excavate shaman, you want to include this, but it is not something you're thrilled by. Worth noting, though, that this is something you could use with, say, like conductivity, whether you discover it or actually play it in your deck, that can give you triple excavate, because it is a targeted effect that you can get the effect of all 3 copies across their minions if they have 3 of them and you play it across their stuff. All right, next up we have Elemental Companion, and this is a mage/hunter card, and it will summon one of the 3 elemental companions, which are new, which I'm going to reveal to you in just one moment once I click the appropriate buttons to do so. I do appreciate the the existence of this card, and I think we saw I think it was Leo who gave some interesting insights. All right, here are our new companions: Luek, Misho, and Hifar. So these are obviously all spell-oriented things, which makes sense because it's one of the cross-sections between Mage and Hunter. There's obviously Mage is a very, very spell-focused class, and Hunter has some spell-heavy focused decks and strategies. So Luek, a 2/4 with spell damage +2 rather than the Leok giving your minions +1 attack. Misho would be the 4/4 taunt. This is kind of the same thing. It's kind of the tank. It's a 4/4, but it can't be targeted by spells and hero powers. And then Hifar, the Huffer. Your spells cost 1 less. This is a Sorcerer's Apprentice, but it's only 4/3 body. So yeah, all of these, if you are playing a spell-oriented deck, can be pretty exciting to hit. They follow the same basic paradigm of stats that the original Animal Companions did. Obviously, they're very contextual, right? If you have like a bunch of cheap spells that you want to burn your opponent out with, Luek is probably the one you're gonna want to hit all the time. If you're looking to put combos sort of together, maybe you want Hifar. Misho is likely to be the disappointing one. Misha often is. You're just like, I'm trying to beat my opponent up, and here's this taunt. What? But 4/4 that can't be targeted by spells or hero powers can be quite difficult for a lot of decks to deal with. So yeah, this is something that you can play in, a deck that cares about spell damage, spells costing less. In particular, like Arcane Hunter really, really uses both Hifar and Luek very well, especially if they manage to survive a turn. That said, this isn't an arcane spell, so it doesn't work with your stuff that does care about your arcane spells. You can't just dig it up with those things. But overall, I think the sort of design of this is at bare minimum very charming as a throwback to an old school card. But I don't know how powerful it is, how much it's likely to see play, simply because it's not very reliable in terms of getting you what you want. And I do feel like a lot of decks in Hearthstone these days need to be more consistent in this card, and frankly, in many cases, more powerful than this card currently affords. All right, moving along. we have, a Warlock card, Elementium Geode. This is a 2-cost 2/1 Elemental. Battlecry and Death Rattle. Draw a card, deal 2 damage to your hero. So this is very much a Kobold Librarian style card. It's also a card that works with things that care about self-damage. This is just a very, very, very solid card, I think. You can use this alongside the Void Virtuoso or the Felstring Harp to avoid or heal from the damage. You can also use it alongside Imprisoned Horror to get more self-damage to be able to get that online faster. Just a general utility solid card for Warlock that I expect we'll see a lot of play in a lot of different Warlock decks because it just does a lot. Next we have Fell Fissure, a 4-cost spell. Deal 2 damage to all minions. Start of your next turn, deal 2 more damage to all minions. So this is a very interesting card because against a lot of aggressive decks, you can clear off a lot of what they're doing, and then they look to reload. But with this, you're gonna reload. Sorry, it doesn't work. The concern for me here is that a lot of decks these days, you're not going to kill very much with the 2 damage up front. 4 mana to do 2 damage is just not that much, right? We were talking earlier with Aftershock. The aggressive minions these days, they either have Divine Shield or they are bigger than this is clearing, at least with the initial pop. And the fact that you can help prevent a reload of at least smaller minions is valuable, but the front part of it is unlikely to kill a lot of stuff to begin with, and you're just going to take a lot of damage back if you do. So that leads me to kind of question how effective this can be against the aggressive decks that do exist. This does feel like it's likely to be a very, very metagame situational card. Simply because, if there are a lot of 2 health minions in the aggressive decks that exist in the metagame, it's great, right? If this is clearing boards of X1s and X2s, fantastic. But if those don't exist and this isn't able to clear boards up front, it's a pretty terrible card. Next up, Fool's Gold. So this is get a random golden pirate and elemental from other classes. So this is just a rogue card. This, could theoretically be a a test style card. One of the interesting things is pirates. There are not very many class pirates currently in standard. They are all class cards, and I think the only class pirates I can think of are the warrior ones, right? And almost all of those are good. Elemental wise, there's a lot of variation, right? But the class pirates that do exist are mostly 3 and 4 cost warrior pirates, and they're all pretty powerful. So that I think is pretty interesting, and you're getting an additional card on top of that, right? And this is only a 1-cost spell. You can use Sword Eater. You can use Hook Fist very, very well as a rogue. I'm also curious, this could be an interesting way to try and play a Hook Tusk deck. The Captain Hook Tusk, where it's okay, you end up having to play a lot of relatively mediocre neutral pirates in order to get that to work. But this giving you access to the warrior pirates, I think is kind of interesting. And the elemental part is, like I said, a lot more of a wide range of stuff, but the random pirate pool that exists within non-rogue classes is currently very small. So I could certainly see this actually being powerful, just gaining those. All right, next up, Fossilized Kaleidosaur. Poor Galvadon and his people. Galvadon, for those who don't know, was the last Kaleidosaur. He's got Wind Fury and a whole lot more. And this can have Wind Fury, but not a whole lot more. With Battlecry, gain 2 random bonus effects and Excavate a Treasure. So A 3/4 4 cost with 2 random effects is medium. It's hard to say, right? Like, obviously, it depends what those effects are. I know that every time I invest in a one amalgam band, it's tough to use because one amalgam band, like you're spending 7 mana on it, and if you're not getting stuff that allows to immediately impact your board, you're going to be in trouble. But this is giving you, excavate as well, which is sort of inherently like a very meaningful amount of additional value. Which you've got to pay a pretty significant amount for in every class except for Rogue, because you get all your stuff for free because you're playing Rogue. And obviously, we just had the addition of Excavate to Paladin. Let's actually take a quick look at what the Excavate reward is for Paladin, since we have not addressed that yet. Boom. The Azurite Dragon. So Azurite Dragon is again the legendary Excavate reward. So this is not a collectible card. Obviously, you don't get to just get a 4-cost 5/5 that does this. But give all other minions in your hand, deck, and battlefield +3/+3. So this is quite strong, right? This is a very, very, very powerful effect. It is more powerful with anything that can have an immediate impact on the board. Anything with Rush, anything with Taunt, anything with Charge. But the fact that it impacts your board as well, this isn't just a hand buff thing, right? This is a hand, deck, and board buff. So if you are able to establish a board of whether it's your Divine Shield minions, whether it's Silverhand Recruits, whatever, you can get a pretty powerful buff off of this immediately that can close games out, and then of course give you additional ways to keep the pressure up, because everything else you have is buffed too. So despite the fact that Fossilized Kaleidosaur is I believe a little difficult to play on curve and feel good about, the fact that you get Excavate Charge that leads up to that certainly makes it feel a lot stronger. All right, next up, Gloomstone Guardian, a 4-cost 6/8 taunt with choose one, discard 2 cards, or destroy one of your mana crystals. Forge, do neither. I think it's a cool design. Forge giving you, the option, like if you're, you have some extra mana, you're just like, okay, I got a huge taunt card here. Very, very strong. But if you don't have the opportunity to forge it, you have 2 options for what you want the drawback to be. And depending where you are, what stage of the game it is, depending how your deck is built, right? If you're playing a discard Warlock deck, just discard 2 cards, 6/8 taunt for 4 is huge. So I'm definitely pretty curious, experimenting with this, because there are enough, I think, discard synergy cards that especially with Sludge and things like that, that this can be a pretty exciting option there. And then obviously, if you do have the mana to forge it, you don't have to worry about that. This does feel like much more of a Warlock card than as a Druid card. Obviously, the Druid part is the choose one part of it. But being able to actually, get a huge overstanded thing. Just think about it. It's so big, right? 6/8 taunt. That's a huge part of it. And you compare this to a Nubisath Defender. A Nubisath Defender is fantastic, obviously, with Forge of Wills, but it can't attack on its own. And it's smaller than this. The 8th point of health is a really big deal. Specifically in that matchup, right? And it's more difficult for aggressive decks to get through. You can have this as a forge card that enables your Ignis and still play it in those same styles of decks if you want it that way too, right? But yeah, I think this is a very, very solid card that is most likely to find its home in Warlock decks that can take advantage of the discard drawback, or at least care less about it. It doesn't say. I assume it's discard 2 cards at random. It doesn't say, but that's my guess. Because otherwise, if you got to like, choose and discard, it's obviously nuts in those decks. So we're gonna assume random and be disgustingly surprised if it's otherwise. All right, next up, Glowstone Gyreworm. 4-cost 4/4 elemental with lifesteal. Quick draw, deal 5 damage. Forge, change quick draw to Battlecry. So most quick draw cards have not been very impressive, right? I think quick draw is probably outside of Flint, which I think is a super cool card, and like the tradable ones. We really don't see quick draw cards seeing play other than like I said, the tradable ones were like Trolley Problem, where you're playing them in a deck that doesn't care about the drawback if you don't you don't hit the quick draw. You're just like, all right, I'll just discard my thing because that's what my deck is built to do. But the fact that this is quick draw, so you know, if you just immediately draw it, hey, I can use this. But if it's sitting in your hand, you can still get the effect because it has Forge to turn that quick draw into Battlecry, right? So I actually feel like this is like a kind of design for a quick draw card that is pretty appealing. It's also worth noting, this is direct damage for Priest. Priest doesn't have like a ton of direct damage. And this is just like, hey, I can just go 5 to your face with this. And it's 5 damage lifesteal as well. So this is like a very powerful combination of effects. I don't know like if the lifesteal on this is necessarily that big a deal in, say, most Priest decks that are like generally able to keep themselves at a pretty high life total anyway. It's not like it's a Warlock card where you can use your life total as a resource, which would make that lifesteal truly insane. But I feel like it is, a very powerful effect just for board control too. And again, as a Forge card, this supports Ignis, right? If you're playing like Control Priest, a lot of Control Priest decks would have to play Creation Protocol and say like Watcher of the Sun in order to support Ignis. And Watcher's not really a super exciting card for them, but this might be. So overall, I think this is a card that, I like the design of, because of the interaction between the Forge and the Quick Draw, and I also think is likely to see a pretty significant amount of play, if only as Ignis support. All right, next up we have Hidden Gem, which is a hilarious name, but 2/2 Stealth Elemental. At the end of your turn, restore 2 health to all friendly characters. This is a very interesting card, right? As like just straight up stealth. This isn't like stealth till your next turn or whatever, but like this can just be like a repeated use card in like an overheal deck, right? If you're playing an overheal deck and your opponent does not have AoE that can kill this, you just play this on like turn 2 or whatever, or play this alongside your other things, and it just starts ticking up and triggering all of your overheals at the end of every turn. That's pretty great, right? Like that's actually a really, really powerful effect in that style of deck. And like maybe you like can't really afford quite like the space for this in addition to whatever, and you want your overheal effects immediately, yada yada yada. I don't know, but like my gut is that this is like a very, very solid card for that like specific niche of deck. As to whether it's like that deck is good enough, especially with just 2. Because like overhealing, say like a Heartthrob by 2, not super exciting. Overhealing a Clergy, obviously very exciting. You're just getting extra cards. And it's not like it's like automatically triggering. If you're in a position where you're like, oh, I'm going to overdraw from healing my Clergy a bunch, well, you can just trade this in. It's just a minion in play, right? But yeah, I think this is a very exciting card that I definitely want to give a shot in overheal, because that's the kind of deck I love. All right, next up, Iridescent Gyreworm. 3-cost 4/3 elemental with Death Rattle. Give each of your minions a random bonus effect. This is a weird card, and that's kind of all I have to say about that. It's just weird, right? It being a Death Rattle, right? So you like you want to use this with like a wide board, but like, are you gonna like play this in turn 3? If your opponent doesn't kill it, you play out a big board and attack this into something? Sure. It doesn't feel like the sort of thing that's powerful enough to like use with things that kill it yourself, or with, death rattle synergy type stuff. It specifically being random makes it hard to, like, make it feel worth, like, building up to. But it's cheap, right? Like, it's also, like, reasonably statted. A 4/3 does mean that it trades down with a lot of 2-drops, but it's not like it's, like, bad stats combined with this. I kind of feel like, say you're playing like Elemental Mage, right? You play an Elemental turn 1, you play an Elemental turn 2, you play this turn 3, and then you play your Surger and get a board of 3/2s, trade this in, and they all have bonus effects. And now it feels like you actually had like a meaningful board there. That's kind of where I'm at with this, but overall, it feels like a tough card to use. So I do kind of question whether it's meaningfully going to see play and where that might be. All right, next up we have Mantle Shaper. This is a Hunter Mage additional spell synergy card. 5 cost 5/5, costs 1 less for each spell you've cast while holding this. So the interesting thing about this is it's an elemental that doesn't really feel like it wants to go into like Elemental Mage at all. It feels like it wants to go into just like a deck that, is like a Tempo Mage style deck, right? Like, I feel like it could be very good in, like, a spell-based Tempo Mage, spell-based Tempo Hunter. Like, maybe this is a card that Arcane Hunter's happy about. Lets them get, like, a, meaningful board presence. The awkward thing is, like, okay, in order to like, play this, you want to be playing... You need this in, like, an opening hand. And you need, like, play a spell, like, each turn. And then you get, like, a, 2 cost 5/5 on, like, turn 5 or whatever, right? It seems like... I mean, that's pretty good. It's not like crazy good. It is an elemental Naga as well, which does mean like you could get this as like a free Naga in Naga Mage. Potentially additional synergies with like the Naga stuff. There's like the barbed nets in Hunter. In Hunter with stuff like bananas or barrel of monkeys, there's lots of multicast things. So you can get this as like a powerful cheap thing with very little effort in either class. The question is just like, okay, well, it's a really bad top deck, right? Like you really don't want to draw a 5 cost 5/5, and like not really have it enabled. So it's a sort of card that you really need to have like in your mulligan, and then you also need to have the spells to support it, which kind of makes it in a weird position. But it also, is just a, any sort of minion with cost reduction like this is something you're just like, oh, well, how quickly can I get this down for free? How quickly can I get this down for really cheap? And it's, it's big enough and cheap enough that I feel like it's a sort of card that feels like it's worth building around and experimenting with, for sure. Speaking of mana cheating, here we have Marut Stonebinder. 7 cost 5/6. This is another neutral Highlander reward. If your deck has no duplicates, discover an elemental to summon, add the others to your hand. Obviously, we saw this effect already on the new Excavate reward. This one is stapled to a 5/6 for 7 that you have guaranteed access to. It's not like a random thing that you have to dig for. But as a Highlander reward, being able to get out like not only get a like tempo effects from this, right? Because you're getting this and whatever additional elemental you summon, and you get the other elementals in your hand. This does feel like it's very likely to be at its best in classes that have elementals themselves, that are bodies that matter. Like even getting the card in your hand though, it's not just like, hey, what is the crazy high roll tempo I get from this? Because if you're playing, say Highlander Shaman, right? Like this can get you the Walking Mountain that you just discover and put into play, which is insane, right? But if you're playing like Highlander Mage, this can get you, like the card draw, like Gladiator. It can get you the, like if you played an Elemental last turn, shoot like for 7 randomly. What is it? I forget the name of it. Unstable something. It's not unstable something. I don't know, but there's a lot of just like solid utility elementals in some of the classes right now. So I feel like this is like not just like, hey, you just slap it into any Highlander deck, kind of like Reno is. It is more of a like, hey, what does my deck do? What does my class do? What are the elementals that are available to me? And evaluate it that way and see if it is something that your class and your deck specifically wants. All right, next up we have Mining Casualties. This is a 2-cost spell. Summon 2 1/1 Silverhand Recruits with Death Rattle. Summon a 1/1 Frail Ghoul. Frail Ghoul is the 1/1 charge that dies at the end of the turn that comes from the Death Knight hero power. And this is, of course, a Paladin / Death Knight spell. This card, I think, is very good. Like, think about this in terms of, like, the corpses that you get for Death Knight. Think about this in terms of just, like, tempo, right? Like, just getting 2 dudes that make 2 other dudes that can, trade off or go face is pretty powerful, right? Like, this is 4 corpses in a Death Knight deck that cares about corpses. This is Silverhand Recruits, and then some in a deck that cares about Silverhand Recruits. I feel like this is just a generally fairly solid card. Giving Paladin access to charge from the Frail Ghouls as well, from like a buffing perspective, is pretty terrifying, right? Being able to like Garden's Grace, Keeper's Strength, whatever, for very little mana, and just smash your opponent down with a charge minion is meaningful. It works with Crusader Aura, right? Like, so there's a lot that you can do with this, I think, across both classes. That is pretty appealing. So I think this is a card that I will certainly be experimenting with, but I do think it will likely end up seeing a meaningful amount of play. Speaking of stapling things together for Death Knight, this is the Death Knight / Hunter card, Mismatched Fossils. Discover a beast and an undead, swap their stats. So this is kind of a weird card, but like being able to find like a huge beast and swap its stats with a tiny elemental or vice versa, or beast elemental rather, undead vice versa. You can get like a Thaddeus and whatever, and it's like, okay, well, I have an 11/11 thing. My guess is that this probably isn't like good enough. It's probably like too high variance a card to meaningfully see a lot of play in either Hunter or Death Knight. But it's a neat card that I think will be like fun to play for people. I just don't think it's consistently good enough to be a competitive card, is at least my gut instinct, unless we get like some crazy charge undead or beast that you can swap with some giant thing and dig to go kill people. All right, next up we have Needle Rock Totem, Mana Tide Totem, eat your heart out. 2 cost, 0/2 totem, and then your turn, gain 2 armor and draw a card. This is just good, right? Like this is like just a powerful card. It's a totem, so obviously totem decks rejoice. This is something that can actually generate value for you that isn't as clunky as a Mana Tide totem. And like look at Gold Panner right now, right? Gold Panner sees play in a lot of different decks, and it's just at the end of your turn, draw a card. It has the same health. The attack is not super relevant, and this gains you armor and draws at 2 as a totem that has additional synergies. I think this card is just great. It's super, super strong. I think that, a lot of warrior decks can struggle a bit with card draw. Getting both card draw and armor off of it is fantastic. Just a great card that I do expect to see a significant amount of play across both classes that it's available to. Next up, Obsidian Revenant. 6 cost, 4/6 elemental with taunt. Death Rattle, summon 2 random Death Rattle minions that cost 3 or less. So there are quite a few Death Rattle synergy cards across both Hunter and Death Knight. Unsurprisingly, here we have our Death Knight Hunter Death Rattle card that gives you Death Rattles. I heard you like Death Rattles, so I put Death Rattles in your Death Rattle so you can Death Rattle while you Death Rattle. But yeah, really powerful, defensive tool. Obviously, like 6 cost is a little bit expensive, but getting a 6 health taunt minion in addition to more Death Rattle minions that come out of it can be pretty solid. I don't think this is like hey, this just like sees play in a bunch of different decks. I think this is only really the sort of thing that you want to play if you are playing a like deck that cares about Death Rattle synergies. I have generally found that death rattle synergies in the current metagame are pretty troubled because of the popularity of Reno. Most of the time when you're playing a deck that's built around death rattle synergies, it's like, hey, this is great against control decks because it is difficult for my opponent to kill all of my things because they have death rattles. But the current metagame, most control decks are Reno decks, which means that you build up your resistance to them killing your stuff and you expend a lot of resources doing so, and then they poof everything, and you're sad. So I think this in like a vacuum does feel like it could be quite a powerful card, but I do think that against Reno specifically, this is a card, not just a card, but fundamentally a strategy that is going to struggle. Next up, Pendant of Earth, a 3-cost nature spell. Discover a minion from your deck, gain armor equal to its cost. So this is another nature spell for priest, which is relevant for when you randomly generate or like steal like a thing that generates nature spells, like the what is it, Sunken Scroll, the Asharan Scroll. This is a new nature card, so that's relevant. You don't just always get Whirlpool, but discover minion from your deck and gain an armor equal to its cost. This is like, hey, I'm gonna go find my Amanthul and gain 7 armor. I'm gonna go find my Behemoth and gain 7 armor. I'm gonna go find whatever huge thing. This is a card that can make like a combo deck more consistent, right? Like if you're playing, say, a Thaddeus Druid deck, being able to gain 10 armor, go find your Thaddeus to put it into play. Obviously a really powerful thing. Yeah, mages can discover this off of Discovery of Magic and use it to go find Sith and survive longer. Cool, we all love it. But using this, like in like a Highlander deck as an extra way to find copies of, say, your Elise, or whatever utility minion you might be looking for, can be quite powerful. I know that the Reno priest decks with like a pretty minimal minion pool to be able to ensure like you're able to Elise only high impact things. This makes it more likely that you find your Elise alongside creation protocol, things like that. It's not a copy. It is important to note, discover a minion from your deck, not discover a copy of a minion. So you can't get extras like you do with creation protocol, but obviously you get the armor as well, and that can help survive, or potentially even survive against like burst combos, because it can give you a big amount of armor as a priest, which you normally couldn't do. All right, next up, Prosthetic Hand. This is a pretty funny card. 3-cost, 3/1 mech with magnetic and reborn that can magnetize 2 mechs or undead. Oko was just jumping around, so what's up, bud? Do you want to magnetize or something? He's magnetized to me. He has given me floof. But yeah, so can magnetize 2 mechs or undead. This is itself a mech. It is, in my mind, this kind of meh. I can't really think of, like, maybe there's like undead that you really want to give reborn to that otherwise couldn't get it. There's already things that you could give with the, I can't remember the name of them, the Embalmer or something that can give mechs or rather give undead reborn. Maybe there's like mechs you want to give them to. You can use this with things that like look for your mechs. You can use it with things that like discount mechs. If you accidentally get a Inventor's Aura off of like a Watcher of the Sun or whatever, boom, nailed it. But yeah, I feel like this is like medium. Doesn't really feel like there's enough powerful synergies across either mechs or undead, or really enough sort of cross demand for things that can work with both of them. That this really necessarily feels super exciting to me. So don't really expect this one to see a lot of play. Next up we have Quartzite Crusher. 4-cost, 3/3 weapon, blood and frost runes, with lifesteal. Freeze any character damaged by your hero. So this is a very powerful card against opponents who want to attack. If there's like a metagame where like there's like weapon decks, this is crazy against weapon decks because you just bonk your opponent with it multiple times. If you're looking for healing in a frost plus blood, maybe a rainbow deck. Maybe this can be like solid healing, like dealing 9 damage and healing 9 over the course of turns is like a pretty reasonable effect. The fact that it has lifesteal and freezes a character, you can attack into a big minion with this, and at least prevent it attacking from attacking you the one time, and get a little bit of life back. But I feel like this is mostly, like I said, mostly the sort of card that in a metagame against heroes that want to attack you, this is quite powerful there, because shutting down a hero from attacking you when they're using a weapon, like this is insane against like Odin Warrior, right? Like if like Odin Warrior is a popular deck, you can discover this, you can play this, and it is real strong at shutting those things down, and keeping you alive over the course of however many turns you need to in order to survive them just nuking you to death with Odin. All right, next up, we have Quick Pick, a 2-cost weapon. This is Demon Hunter and Rogue. 1/2 after hero attacks, draw a card. Pretty straightforward, just very simple weapon. It's, I think, if you're looking for to play a deck that is trying to churn through your deck with card draw, this could be pretty solid. Reasonable if you are like have like weapon synergy things that you care about in especially Demon Hunter, I guess. One thing that I actually was looking for when I was experimenting with something was a like cheap weapons that I wanted to play in Demon Hunter in order to use the instrument breaker, and this is one you could use with that, right? I think in Demon Hunter this is like pretty exciting with like you don't necessarily have as good card draw for a lot of versions of Demon Hunter if you're not like playing some of the the super cheap stuff, and this could be just a cheap way, like, hey, like for instance, I play Gold Panner in my Highlander Demon Hunter deck. This is kind of like a Gold Panner. The advantage of Gold Panner, of course, in some ways, is your opponent has to deal with it, or you can draw even more cards. Whereas this is going to get you 2 cards over turns, basically no matter what. Whereas Gold Panner can get you 1 card, or it can get you 3 or 4 cards, or it can get you 1 card and force your opponent to use removal on it. So it is a general rule that cheap things that draw cards are things that you want to pay attention to. This is a cheap thing that draws cards that I'm paying attention to. And again, I do think I'd like the idea of at least playing this alongside like Instrument Breaker, and be able to use like Instrument Breaker and a cheap weapon, and then like if your Instrument Breaker doesn't die, you can go down swing and just go through a bunch of weapons and maybe just draw a ton of cards. Who knows? Next up, speaking of weapons, Shadestone Skulker. This is another rogue/demon hunter card. 1/1 with Rush and Battle Cry. Take your weapon and gain its stats. Death Rattle, give it back. It's a weird card, right? A very weird card, because it's take your weapon. I assume you don't like get the death rattle of the weapon when it takes your weapon, right? Because if it does, then weapons that have death rattle effects could be very interesting with. Yeah, it's it's just kind of odd. I don't really like a deck that cares about weapons, like with say like Weapon Rogue, say like maybe you're playing a weird weapon Demon Hunter deck. I don't know. Obviously, like if you're playing a deck that's like looking to like buff up a big weapon, like Wild Kingsbane, maybe this could be nuts to like give you a way to like kill an opposing minion, like a huge rush minion, and then you just get your Kingsbane back and keep going. But yeah, I just don't know what this is gonna do. And obviously this being like a tremendously bad card as a 1/1 rush, if you don't have a weapon, is obviously like a pretty rough fail state for it. So you'd have to have a deck that is like either loaded with weapons or has ways to like search for weapons. Again, I think that one of the things that is really important for this is whether it triggers the death rattle of your weapon, because if it does, using with things like Glaive Tar that have like a powerful death rattle could be extremely strong. If it's just like your weapon like temporarily disappears but you don't get the death rattle from it, that is a very, very different question for how powerful this card is. All right, next up, Shadow Word Steel. 5 cost, rogue / priest. Return an enemy minion to your hand. Okay, first of all, it's a cool effect, right? This is just like steal their thing. Gonna be really, really annoying. I'm sure people will hate it because people hate losing to their own stuff. But what I really hate is the wording. How does this return an enemy minion to a place it's never been? Why is this not just like put an enemy minion into your hand? Why is it using the verbiage return? That's really what gets me here. I don't understand. Like, it just feels very strange. But this is clearly, I think, a pretty powerful card for any kind of like controlling deck. You know, maybe I guess it's supposed to be like, you know, like if it's looking to be like a Entomb / sap, sap is like return. I don't know. It's just like it's just strange. It should just be put. But regardless, for any kind of like controlling priest deck, obviously pretty powerful. I'm more skeptical of this in Rogue. Rogue doesn't really typically have like controlling tools to play longer games, and like the value you get from an expensive removal effect that gives you something else that you can play is going to be hard to leverage when you don't really have like taunt or life gain overall. But as a priest card, yeah, people are going to hate this. Next up, Shale Spider. Obviously a very basic card, a 2-cost 3/2. Battle Cry, if you played an elemental last turn, draw a card. I have probably played more elemental decks than most people, than just about everyone. Maybe not Oko. Oko loves elemental decks. But this is just a solid staple, like, you know, value / curve minion in decks that are looking to follow an elemental chain. That's all it is, right? I doubt we'll see like, you know, decks that are like, oh, I'm gonna play like early elemental curve to support Shale Spider because I want the card draw. You're almost certainly just playing an elemental deck or not. If you're playing an elemental deck, you're playing this. How good are the elemental decks? I don't know. I still want Firefly, right? I still think the format really, really wants Firefly. But this is just like a overall just very solid, you know, hey, like if a deck like, you know, wants to find a specific card, you're doing better with it. You're finding Scar more often in your Elemental Shaman deck because you have Shale Spider to keep drawing. You know, you're you know, just able to chain things together more effectively because of this card draw. So overall, just a I think solid card that will be a important role player in those decks, but does not seem good enough to make those decks good if they're not already. It's just you know, it's just solid. Look at it. Clearly, it's made of shale. It's solid. Anyway, next up we have a Shattered Reflections. 5 cost. This is a priest. Is this priest druid? Priest druid? I think it's priest druid, right? I'm confirming. I'm colorblind, which makes these things hard to tell sometimes. I was right. It's priest druid. Choose a minion. Add a copy to your hand, deck, and battlefield. This is a sweet card. So, you know, speaking of people hating losing their own stuff. Oh, did you play a Titan against me? Well, now I have your Titan and another Titan in my hand and then another Titan in my deck. It is obviously, you know, much better against stuff like Titans than it is against, say, you know, Battle Cries, because putting the thing into play, if it has a, you know, has a Battle Cry, is much less compelling. But you do get a copy in your hand, right? You get a copy in your hand, your deck, and your battlefield. A lot of the big things that you might be seeing in a lot of cases could be like Excavate rewards, which is interesting because, like, if you Shattered Reflection, say your opponent's Azurite Scorpion, you're like, okay, I can get, you know, a bunch of free spells, but the free spells that you get don't get discounted because you haven't excavated because you're playing Priest or Druid. But I can also see that, you know, you can use this like with, say, you know, Highlander cards, right? Like if you are playing like a Highlander Druid and you're just like, okay, I can get like, you know, your Bran or my Raystraza or, you know, Ignis or whatever. Obviously, you know, 5 costs, just like, hey, I'm going to copy the Ignis you played, is not necessarily good. But you do have to worry if you are playing a Highlander deck, because it does add something to your deck. If it is something you are playing a copy of, you're gonna be very, very sad. Could go in like Automaton Priest, right? Automaton Priest loves having more copies of automatons. It's like, here we go. We get an extra automaton in play, extra automaton in my hand, extra automaton in my deck. And you know, I think it's just gonna be a very very versatile card that can do a lot of interesting combo stuff as well. I think it's gonna be solid. Probably it feels like the sort of card that's like better in Priest because you're looking to play longer games generally, but maybe that's wrong. Maybe just because Druid can ramp up and do this faster alongside their own things they want to copy, it may be even better there. And also, like Druid is a class that like other than with Reno can struggle to deal with like big things, and dealing with your big thing by just making my own can be a pretty powerful way to do it as well. Next up, Shimmer Shot. One cost arcane spell, deal 1 damage, summon a random minion of that cost. Guess what? That cost is not going to be 1 very often. Just another arcane spell damage tool. I can certainly see someone like getting hit for like 10 with this and popping like a Thaddeus or whatever. Boom. It's kind of funny, but yeah, I think this what this card is like pretty obvious where it goes, pretty obvious what it does. Don't really have much more to say about that. All right, next up, Shroomskavate. So this is the weird one. Why is this one so big? Apparently we're Shroomskavating real deep. I don't know why that showed so huge on the screen, but 3-cost spell, give a minion Wind Fury and Divine Shield, excavate a treasure. So when I first saw this, I was like, how is this gonna be any good? Because, like, I remember when the first Excavate cards were revealed, and I was saying I felt like the Warrior Excavate package was bad because Blast Charge was super situational and, inefficient and difficult to use. Blast Charge then ended up getting buffed, and I think that the package there's at least more reasonable. But this one is a 3-cost spell that requires a minion in play that you want to give Wind Fury and Divine Shield to get your treasure at all. Obviously, Paladin and Shaman can generate minions with their hero power, so it's like never going to be dead once you have like 5 mana. But like, you have to have something that you care about, like buffing in play for this to like not be bad. And if people recognize that, like, hey, you're playing a deck that is like excavating, it is going to be difficult for this to be very useful in a lot of cases. It's going to be slow to use, right? And when you're wanting to excavate and get the value of those excavate treasures, all of that comes from getting them relatively quickly, right? That said, I do think the fact that this is really good with Burrow Buster is a major component to why it might be reasonable at least. Like, Burrow Buster uses both these effects very well, and is also a card that's obviously going to be in any kind of excavate deck, right? So, you're in this strange position, and also worth noting, both of the excavate rewards, let me actually pull up the other one. Both of the excavate rewards for Shaman and for Paladin care about minions, right? Ta-da! There's the Shaman one. We showed off the Paladin one before. It was the dragon that gave everything +3/+3. This one is transform all your other minions into ones that cost 3 more, keeping their original cost. So important to note with the Azurite Murloc, all means the ones in play, the ones in your hand, and the ones in your deck. That's why the keeping the original cost is an important note there. But this works really poorly with Shroomskavate, because if you Shroomskavate something and then Azurite Murloc, it gets evolved and you lose your Divine Shield Wind Fury. You obviously could, cast it after the fact on something else, but it puts you in like a strange position of like, I get my reward by casting this, and now I don't want to cast my reward because it ruins the thing I used. This just feels like difficult to use. Especially, again, like the rewards for both Paladin and Shaman want you to have like very, very minion dense decks, and then one of your ways to dig them up, to excavate them, is a spell. So I guess the fact that they want you to have very minion dense decks does mean that with Shroomskavate, you're like, okay, well, at least I have a bunch of targets for this because I'm playing tons of minions to get the most out of my excavate cards. But even then, like, I don't know. I feel like you need to play like a bunch of like rush minions with this, like cheap rush minions. Maybe you're playing just the 2/3 rush that gets lifesteal with finale or whatever, and that's just in both these decks because you need the board control and you need something that's a good target for this early on. But regardless, I feel like this is kind of the weak link of the Paladin, Shaman, Excavate cards, and I am curious to see how it ends up playing out. But they do get another cool reward. Boom, with Sir Finley the Intrepid. I don't know why everything suddenly just got huge. With these cards were smaller when I was using them before, but these were apparently big versions. Anyway, Sir Finley the Intrepid. 3 cost 2/3 Murloc with Battlecry. If you've excavated twice, transform all enemy minions into 1/1 Murlocs. This card's real good. This card is very powerful. Obviously just very, very useful against, anything that your opponent cares about having in play. Like this is very powerful against Titans. It's very powerful against buffed things. Very powerful against death battles. It is, virtually your own like kind of Reno sort of effect in the sense that it gets rid of everything that's in play because now you're Murlocifying them. But yeah, this is just a very, very strong card against basically any deck that cares about having minions in play, which is a lot of decks these days. So real strong. Obviously will get played in both those sort of excavate shells and be an all-star in either of them. Next up, and back to normal size, we have Soul Freeze. This is a Warlock Mage Frost spell. 1 cost, freeze a minion and its neighbors. Deal damage equal to your hero equal to the number frozen. So this is a very powerful stall card, right? 1 cost, to potentially freeze 3 things. Obviously, it can damage yourself. You'll take some damage. Warlock can use that to its advantage, with the things that heal off of that, or transform it into healing, or make them mute, whatever else. In a world where you care about, like there are like significant numbers of multi-minion aggressive decks, mid-range decks. I feel this would be very annoying. It's at least like not a card that you can like just keep playing and lock people out of because you do damage yourself. But even Warlock can like freeze Doomsayer if they want, and Warlock's a class that actually cares about using Doomsayer and can use cheap spells really well because they just tap and draw stuff efficiently. So I just think this is a I don't think it's like a hey, this becomes a staple in a bunch of decks, but I can certainly see this being played in decks that are intentionally looking to stall out and maybe build to some sort of combo. Next up, Stone Drake. A 6 cost 2/8 Divine Shield Taunt Lifesteal can't be targeted. And it's a Elemental Dragon. So this is kind of an interesting card. A combination of effects, Divine Shield, Taunt, Lifesteal, can't be targeted. Like the can't be targeted along with Divine Shield is nice, in the sense that it like stops people from like pinging it down. Very, very powerful with say like Black Rock and Roll to get like a huge can't be targeted thing. I definitely want to try this in my taunt deck. So those of you who remember the sort of Black Rock and Roll taunt style deck, or even just without Black Rock and Roll taunt buff deck, very, very powerful tool for that style of deck because you're looking to have something that your opponent can't easily deal with, and obviously the combination of Lifesteal, can't be targeted, Taunt, Divine Shield works really well with buffs. It doesn't necessarily work quite as well with like say Lorthamar or Last Stand because it has such a low attack that it's not really going to be much of a clock. But overall, I think this is pretty appealing. Also gives an elemental if you're playing a deck that's looking to have like an elemental chain that is less aggressive and looking to have some decent amount of defensive tools. Right now we don't really have much in the way of dragon synergies, but hopefully we'll in the future that we'll care about this as well. And next up, Summoning Ward. 3 cost secret, obviously 3 cost because it's mage secret. When your turn starts, summon a copy of your highest cost minion. So there aren't that many minions, like minion mage decks, where like this is really like particularly appealing. Um, the only places where like I'd be really excited about this is like stuff like Aegwynn, where you get like multiple copies of Aegwynn or a minion that has Aegwynn's ability, but those typically die. Maybe you're playing like Secret Mage with like the Conjurer, right? And you can play this alongside like the Conjurer dude and get a 6/6 for free, which could be really really powerful. Um, it does make the Researcher in Excavate Mage a bit worse in most uses because those decks typically are not like sitting around with minions they are excited to copy in play. But yeah, overall, this is not a card that I'm thrilled about because having to have a minion survive through your turn to really accomplish anything can be a pretty big challenge. And there aren't necessarily that many that you're like, hey, this is amazing. I got an extra copy of this. It is obviously insane with Orion, though. That's for sure. Next up, Trog Gem Tosser. 3 cost 3/2 with Finale. Deal 1 damage to a random enemy for each of your mana crystals. Like, just a, shoot all your stuff guy. It feels much more druid to me than I mean, I guess like the Warlock part is the random damage to your opponent's stuff, but it still doesn't feel like a Warlock card to me. But it is a Finale card. But yeah, I mean, I guess you can like nuke someone for 10 or even 11 with an audio amplifier. It is a Finale, not Battlecry, by the way, so you can't use this with like anything that duplicates the effect. Like if you had like Wild with Bran and Guff or whatever, it isn't going to do it. It does not spend the mana, but it is a Finale effect, so you have to have already spent the mana. So it's fine, I guess. Like it is random enemy, not like random enemy minions, so it's not necessarily reliable removal. So I would expect it to mostly be seen as like, hey, I'm looking to, end the game, killing you. I don't really see this as going into like the Thaddeus Warlock decks that already have enough tools to end games or anything like that. But yeah, maybe there's some gross way to use this to like OTK people or something, but I don't think it's probably better than anything that doesn't already exist. And all right, and lastly, our final card that we are delving into Deepholme for is Therazane. 7 cost 7/5 Taunt Elemental with Death Rattle, double the stats of all elementals in your hand and deck. So this is just a weird card to me. One of the things about this is that like most of the elemental cards like that are like good right now that are seen right now are like things that care about like their battle cry more than like their stats. You have lots of like powerful battle cry effects, lots of powerful like utility type stuff that isn't really really related to their stats. Most of the elementals are not like hey, this is good because it's huge. I feel like if you are like if this is gonna say play, see play, it's gonna be in like a more controlling oriented shell, obviously, because it's a expensive taunt minion. But like none of the cards really like lend themselves to be like control oriented because they are you want to have played a bunch of elementals. I mean, I guess like playing this and like getting double stat like Azurite elementals or Azurite giants that are like free 16/16. That's kind of cool, but like those just get renode, right? She can just get renode because she's a 7 cost Death Rattle. So even with like Alakir, right? Like Alakir getting doubled stats, yeah, it does a lot of damage, but like like it only has 3 attack to start with, so it still does 24, but even like like Therazane into Alakir doesn't end the game by itself. So maybe that's where it goes, is like like a like higher curve like Alakir plus Walking Mountain Elemental Shaman deck. That's like not like leaning on being very aggressive in the early turns, but it's just like looking to and like use some of the cheap elementals to enable like the the card draw 3/2, and then like try to get the powered up big rush / charge things later on. But even then, like, it can just get silenced. It can just get renode. It's a death rattle, right? And it's like a 7/5 taunt, so its stats for its cost aren't even particularly impressive. So I don't know. Maybe there's some way that you like multi-death rattle this in one of those classes and have some sort of crazy elemental burst finish with those. But either way, it does feel like pretty tough to use in a strategy that already feels like it's pretty tough to make work as far as the elemental decks are concerned. And I gotta go delving for that thing I just dropped, because we are done delving in Deepholme. That is it. Those are all the cards. So, like I said, overall, I'm pretty excited for this this mini set. I do feel like, in particular, like the dual class stuff is always exciting, especially giving more options to classes in a pool of cards that otherwise wouldn't be that big. And of course, the additional stuff that we get just from Excavate being not only introduced to 2 new classes that I'm excited about, and certainly looking forward to, Azurite Dragoning and Azurite Murlocking people, but also having more options to play with the Excavate rewards in every class from the cards that already do exist. So let me know what you think. What are your favorite cards we've found delving into Deepholme, and what are you looking to play? So I will get right to it with the pups when we can, when the mini set comes out. So thanks for watching. I will see you later.